so much to everyone for joining us today. I'm Nan Morrison, the CEO of the Council for Economic Education. Momentarily, I'll be joined by my dear colleague, Billy Hensley, who's the CEO of NEFI, the National Endowment for Financial Education. We're so pleased to be here today to talk to you about the importance of financial education and the racial wealth gap, and how financial education can actually play a role, a small one, but an important one, in helping to address that equity issue. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about CEE, my organization, which would be page 3, and hopefully Billy will be on to talk about NEFI, as we call them in the industry. So the Council for Economic Education was founded about 70 years ago by a group of people who thought it was really important to be teaching economics and personal finance to K through 12 kids, and that is still our mission, to equip those K through 12 kids with these tools so that they can make better decisions for themselves, their families, and their communities. We actually started out focusing on educators, and that is now one of our 3 audiences, but we still do that. We provide professional development online and in better times offline, but increasingly online because that's where education is going for professional development. And we also create high quality resources for educators. Our online platform, ExcelinEd, has over 800,000 unique sessions each year, and we've started to put curated high quality content, educator developed as well, onto ExcelinEd, and it's a wealth of tools for educators as well. Our second audience is students. We run 2 amazing challenges, the National Personal Finance and National Economics Challenges. They teach analytical thinking and teamwork. The students and kids love them. In 2019, we had over 30,000 of them participating. And we recently merged with an organization called Invest in Girls, which not only helps girls to learn about personal finance for themselves, but also introduces them to careers in finance and financial services. So this is another way that we can help to create equity in various venues. Our third audience is growing. It's family. We've had huge success with our family financial literacy nights, and in the virtual world, we've created fun packs for families to use at home. And we also created those with an eye to equity to make sure that people didn't need to go out and buy a lot of things to do these. They could look online for lessons, and they could do some of the fun activities with things they had at home. And there's a lot of math packed into those activities, which I personally love. You see that Billy is connecting. So what I'd like to do is go to slide 4, please, and talk a little bit about the definitions that we use when we talk about financial education. Because I really would love Billy to introduce himself, because NEFI does such tremendous work, and he has been done such a great job in the short time that he's moved into the CEO role. So why are we starting with definitions? Well, we're starting with definitions because these words, even though they seem simple, do seem to create a lot of confusion. And there do seem to be a lot of ways that people think about this. So I'm going to read a little bit about financial education and why we define it this way. A systematic approach to cultivating financial knowledge and financial decision-making skills. It implies the use of then a whole bunch of stuff, which you can read: pedagogy, learning objectives, assessment. We take these subjects seriously, just like any other academic subject. And the research shows, much of it actually done by NEFI, and many of it using our resources, that when well-trained teachers conduct education with educator-developed resources, the kids learn, just like you would expect in physics or math or any of the other subjects that we teach to our students today. Of course, the most important thing is getting a good outcome. And that outcome is financial literacy, understanding what to do, and in some cases, even whether potentially creating or sometimes changing behaviors. We just got a note from a young woman in our Invest in Girls program that said after participating in just a few sessions of our program, she walked into the bank to open a checking account. And she was so excited because when she looked at the walls, she saw lots of words, and those words were financial terms, and she understood all of them. So she was excited, and we, of course, were thrilled. a lot of what this education is just demystifying this world, giving people the language and tools so that they can go forward and do the things that they need to do. I'm going to take a moment to just say a few things about NEFI, the National Endowment for Financial Education. If you could pop back to slide 2, please. It is a private operating foundation, and they do have a national focus. They're in Denver. I love to visit Billy around March so I can get some skiing in. When I think of NEFI, I think of them as the people who really, really do the deep, wonderful research so that the rest of us can have some direction. And there's Billy. I just started to introduce NEFI. I talked about definitions, and Billy, nobody can talk about NEFI better than you can, but I've been writing a verbal love letter to NEFI while we've been waiting for you. So why don't you pick it up and tell us a little bit more about NEFI, and then we can transition into the standards from there.
And you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, goodness sakes. Our internet is down and I'm using my cell phone as a hotspot. So, on the fly here. New normal. Thank you, Nan. I appreciate you keeping this going while I was having to reset up. But we are a private operating foundation. We're headquartered in Denver, but our work is national, and we sort of bounce around to meetings all over the country. And our work, our public charity initiatives, our philanthropy is focused through what we provide to our community, to our discipline, to a greater understanding of things like economic mobility and how financial education is one of the tools in that toolbox to help folks become more financially well, if you will. And we do that through educational initiatives, but more so our shift has really moving toward research providing data and convening folks that don't normally talk to each other. When you think about do teachers and practitioners talk to researchers very often, and how do we facilitate that? Same with policy and getting people in the room to talk to each other about complex issues. Personal finance and financial wellness are complicated issues that need different perspectives. So we try to be that for our space and for our community, a place for dialogue, a place for tough questions, and then through partnerships like with our friends at the Council for Economic Education and co-hosting events and helping think through the broader initiatives and the broader strategy for our discipline. We have 25 staff. We're a smaller organization, but we do all of that through our endowment, which we don't raise money. We just live off of the proceeds of our endowment, just like most other foundations do. If you want to know more, you're very welcome to peruse our website. All right, let's talk about what is this topic? What is financial education? What is financial literacy?
Billy, I covered that while we were waiting for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nan.
Probably not as well as you would, but the standards are up next. Thanks.
Yes. There's these concepts of what you cover, and the way we talk about this space at NEFI is that there's this financial ecosystem that we all live within, and our life evolves within, and there are many elements that create a healthy ecosystem. Financial education is an important component of that, and sometimes people misunderstand financial information with financial education, and financial information really is the how do you tips to make good decisions, or those rare decisions. But financial education helps you to still, a quote from one of Nan's board members, it helps you be the CFO of your life, of your financial life. And so those foundational concepts to create financial education, which builds financial literacy, is about your earning and your income, how you spend, how you prioritize, how you make decisions, and even values, if you will. What do you value? What's important to you? How do you make goals? How do you save for those things? What is investing? How do you invest not only in yourself through things like training and education, but also for your future? How do you manage credit in your life? What's the healthy balance with things like credit? Asking those tough questions, developing the plans to do so, and then importantly, managing risk, and that's everything from insurance to your online identity. And so that's how we cover the topic, to give you a good foundation to become the CFO of your life.
Move on to the survey of the states. Billy, thanks for talking about the foundational concept. These form the basis of our national standards. And Billy is part of a group that's leading the charge on pulling together a common set of national standards. And we're very excited about that project. What I love about the standards is that they drive us to evaluate options, to think critically, to plan effectively. Actually, Billy, I think I'm getting a reverb from your phone. Financial capability is really essential to navigating the world and for our kids to be able to build secure and fruitful lives. Sadly, to commit the time, the resources, these subjects of personal finance, and for us also economics, need to have a secure place in public education, and they do not. Financial education is not currently incorporated into the majority of school curricula. So every 2 years, as part of our advocacy work, we produce the survey of the states to get the lay of the land, where each state stands in terms of adopting standards and requirements and ensuring that they have teeth. We track the progress and sometimes some backsliding in order to understand where to best leverage our national network of affiliates to drive new momentum and confront ongoing challenges. We have some reasonably good news this year. 21 states now require high school students to take a class in personal finance to graduate. That's four states, five states passed requirements, one dropped off. We had an increase in 3 states requiring economics, which was also great. Sadly, testing has dropped off, and 3 fewer states require testing. It's a controversial topic, but at the end of the day, it does help people get focused. Now, getting requirements passed can take lots of dedicated effort and years of it from policymakers such as state treasurers, members of Congress, parents, individuals, even kids. And this year, we are really thrilled to be partnering with Billy and NEFI to present a series of advocacy events that will happen early this winter to talk about various topics and themes around why requirements are important, how they can make a difference, and to advocate for more and better financial education in key areas of the country. Importantly, requirements make a difference. If you can flip to the next slide, please. There's just a ton of research, much of it done by or funded by NEFI, I must say. I told you, Billy, this was like a love letter to NEFI for me. And the research confirms the critical role of state requirements in promoting more informed decision-making in many areas. And you can see them here. And we've learned things that kids with financial education make better decisions around college financing. They tend to get more scholarships. They tend to get lower cost loans. Coming out of college, they have lower default rates. They tend to have higher credit scores. All of these things build to creating a healthier future, even at this very young age, not even 20 yet. And what's sad is that you start to see the inequity. So if you could flip to the next slide, please. In states where there's no required course, the access gap, the gap between kids who have access to this education or not when it's not required between the high income schools and lower moderate income schools is over 15 points. That is big. You could cut that in half and it would still be concerning. Requirements ensure that these subjects get into our poorest communities where they need the financial survival skills the most. It matters. And Billy's going to go into some more detailed research on the racial wealth gap.
Okay, and sorry about the reverb. There's a large garbage truck outside my office. It's just one of those days, you know. These gaps are common in education. You know, those of you who have been working in this in policy, classroom teachers, principals, superintendents, advocates, board members, you've seen some of these data for years, you know, things like math scores and access to calculus and so forth. I mean, there's a whole Hollywood movie about that. But when you look at what financial education does economically. Nan gave an overview of those data. And quality, and there's a minimum standard for FinEd. It's not just a 2-week component that you check the box and move on. To do it right, it's a very comprehensive topic that needs to be engaged. And when you see what it does, increases credit scores, lower revolving debt, you're helping an entire generation get started on a more financially stable footing in their community. And this holds true no matter the income level, but you have to have access to it. And when you already see that these huge gaps persist, and they grew over the last several decades, really it's really grown since the 70s consistently. But we're doing all we can from an education point of view to try to bring quality FinEd together to close these gaps. But just like every other topic and every other issue that we face in education, there's several factors that influence this. You can be very financially literate but not have access to good paying jobs in your community. And then, you don't have the resources to be able to leave and move to a place maybe that has different job opportunities. Who's going to buy your house, for example? How are you going to move with limited to no resources? Generations of my ancestors left Central Appalachia for that very reason. And some couldn't. They just couldn't leave because there weren't the resources to do that. And so what happens here is we perpetuate this continuing widening gap. And one small way we can do that is just to begin to chip away at this, is to offer quality FinEd in all schools. This is an access issue. It's an equity issue for us. And so you see these gaps holding up when you look at things like transference of wealth, handing over from generation to generation through things like inheritance. And, there's all kinds of policy about inheritance and estate taxes and things like that. But just in terms of the fundamental numbers, the access to wealth transference is a huge gap. 2.6 to 2.3 is the difference between these, and it's growing. It's getting worse. There's less resources to be able to hand over. And if we can do things in the classroom to help chip away at that by helping folks get on a right footing, by helping them understand advancement opportunities and financial education and so forth, we can chip away at that. So I think Nan has a video clip to share to kind of talk about the importance of this.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. I think this really illustrates the point that you were making quite beautifully. It's from Raj Chetty, an economist at Harvard, who's done a massive data analysis across generations to visually show the impact that this has on the intergenerational wealth transfer.
Purple dots are for Black kids. The green dots are for white kids. And you see what I think is a really disturbing pattern about America, which is if you look at the purple dots, they tend to cascade towards the bottom. So even if you grew up in a high-income family, you have a tremendously high chance of ending up even, in the bottom fifth or certainly in the lower middle class.
Yeah, this just really struck me when I saw it for the first time, and it really puts a fine point on the slide that Billy was showing, which is that this isn't just point in time data, right? This perpetuates itself. It's a recurring instant.
And there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of which is what we're talking about here in terms of access to quality financial education curricula in the classroom. Education is meant to be an equalizer. It's meant to be an on-ramp for access to topics and engagement and learning. And if we can get quality FinEd in every classroom, no matter the income, no matter the race, no matter the demographics of the local community, the data are clear in what it's able to do. And look at these data here about the difference between African American financial literacy and compared to white households in terms of being able to answer certain questions correctly on a survey. Knowledge about borrowing. There's a huge gap there, 20% gap in knowledge about borrowing. And so, borrowing is a huge component of your life when you're buying a home, buying a car, or even smaller dollar loans. The same with consumption, the ability to apply financially literate concepts to your own consumption, same, spending, saving. You see these gaps persist here. Comprehending risk is the place where we're the closest, and there's probably really interesting reasons for that. But when you talk about the ability, the knowledge to apply what they know about things like investing, insurance, saving, and so forth, these gaps are wide, and this is about what people know. So if we can close the gaps in what people know, hopefully there's the opportunity they can apply those things. And if every student has access to this, then we can get every state to a place where credit scores are higher and revolving balances are lower. People are borrowing smarter when it comes to going to college. College doesn't have to be necessarily a debt-ridden experience based on that. And what we've seen from a study that we funded was that when you have a quality course in financial education as a high school student, you make better decisions with federal student aid. And how you borrow private loans less, and you use federal aid with low interest rates and no, fully subsidized interest rates through school more. So there are very clear, measurable financial gains to what we do as an industry. And so much of what we provide as a community in terms of financial education curriculum and resources has no charge. There are so many quality, and those that do have charge, those things that have charge like textbooks and resources and so forth, are very low cost. And what you get out of that from a policy perspective and at the state level pays for itself, many times over. So we know we threw a lot of data at you. We gave you some definitions, data wonk here and the practitioner wonk there. Nan and I make a good team. We want to, talk about this issue and how do we advocate for this in an effective policy point of view, and how do we do this to help all students and all communities have the equal opportunity to start off on a financially literate right foot, if you will. So I think we can do questions maybe through the chat. I know, Nan, I had a couple of thoughts while we were going through that. Did you have any thoughts you wanted to kind of put out there?
I had one little story to add when you were talking about, and a question for you when you were talking about, even just moving away from where you grew up to have a better life. One of the educators in our Invest in Girls program is doing a special program for young women in the Baltimore area. They're from Baltimore. They grew up there. They have 2-year or 4-year degrees. They have jobs. But they're very early in their careers. And she asked them what were they most interested in talking about as part of the seminar on personal finance. Now, these girls had all had journeys in their lives to get to where they are. And they had somewhere along the way figured the basics out on money, how to budget. They understood their paychecks. What they really wanted to talk about was intergenerational wealth building and what they could do to have better lives, not just for themselves, but for their children and their grandchildren. And it just put a very human face on all of the data that we've been looking at, in particular over the last several months, as so many of these studies have come together and drawn this picture for us. So this is a really important point. We're at an important point of time in our country. We have the data that says it makes a difference. And my question to you, Billy, is what do you think equitable access in financial education looks like? How do we know we're making a difference?
Well, when that the low-hanging fruit here is the chart you showed. When you see the schools that are in higher poverty areas are able to offer a quality financial education course at the same rate as the wealthier peers. Or how about this? Everyone. In states where it's a graduation requirement, then there's no access gap. Every school that falls under the state department's Department of Education's purview is required to offer a quality course for a full semester to graduate. When that happens, you do reduce those huge gaps, at least in terms of what people know. There has to be the opportunity to be able to apply what you know through good jobs and things like that, and full participation in the banking system and so forth. And this last chart here is a good example of what that looks like. When every student can graduate high school with access to financial education, and hopefully they all take the class seriously. Kids, they're going to blow certain things off, but when you do that and you build financial literacy, you're less likely to be financially fragile. Here's some data from our friends at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, who their academic director is actually on NAN's board. We're a small community, we all know each other, but they worked with the TIAA Institute to look at, the more financially literate you are, the less financially fragile you are. So if you see the more questions you get correct, which is a measure of financial literacy, the less likely you are to be financially fragile. So when you get up to that point of getting 76 to 100% of the questions correct, you shrink that gap in financial fragility to only 4% between African Americans and whites. And so knowledge goes a long way in helping build financial health in our community. And that's, it's a great place to start in K-12. I think colleges, are now really looking at this as part of the holistic offering of what happens. Not everyone goes to college, but if our community colleges are offering courses like this for those, those working families who are taking classes part-time, trying to get that credential so they can move up in their job, all of this helps as they get access to jobs with things like 401ks and health insurance and so forth. And they understand how to best manage those things instead of just getting a big stack of paper that they don't know what to do with, or a stack of PDFs now when you start a new job. So to me, that's the entry level. That's the low-hanging fruit. Just give it to every student. And I realize that there's shelf space issues. I realize there's so many hours in the day. But when a topic like this has such a direct outcome to the economic success of its citizens of a state, I would say, why would you keep this from your students? That's my question to state policymakers.
Yeah, well, as usual, I couldn't have said it better. I'll add a little bit of color from the student perspective. So one of my favorite stories about getting requirements in place comes from Virginia. And it was actually students that drove that. Now, they worked with other organizations like our state council, with legislatures, state treasurer, so it took a village to get those requirements passed, and there were some other not-for-profits involved, but it was really the kids who moved that forward, the high school kids. And at the end, when it was finally passed, the first class of kids came through, and one of the young people that was interviewed said, "This was the best class I took in high school, the one that's going to make the most difference to me as I go forward, and starting immediately." Now, I kind of hope he did really well in math and sees that as a tool too, but that to me was really telling, and he is not the only person that we've heard tell that story. In fact, about a year later, I was visiting some friends in Blacksburg, and Sam said, "Oh, Aunt Nan, I just started college, and I really wish that requirement had been passed when I was in high school." Of course, his parents were like, they never wanted to talk to us about it. but the kids get this, and the little kids get it. And that is a really important time to start. I know that in some of our states, we do a lot of work in elementary school, and going back to the wealth gap, the work in low and moderate income communities. I had a fourth grade teacher in Mississippi tell me that she uses teaching about personal finance concepts to teach kids how to set objectives. And she said, if they can start understanding setting objectives now, and that if you save money, you get a reward, if you do your homework, good things happen, and kind of get into those good habits that are life habits as well as financial habits. She said, I can get them through, and maybe they'll finish high school and get that high school degree. And that is a real linchpin of success in this country. So, and then maybe they'll go forward. So there are multiple ways where just having access to this education can be helpful. just in teaching fundamental good decision-making skills, as well as the more specifics of managing money in thoughtful ways.
I think the other piece here is, one of the unsaid benefits is we start to remove the stigma associated with talking about money management. We're all a little bit, we don't want anybody to think we don't know about things. We don't want anybody to think we don't understand. And so we either say, oh, I'm not a money person, like people say, oh, I'm not a math person, or I'm not a this person. We start to remove that stigma. And my bad joke that I tell all the time is that when I was a kid, there were 3 things we didn't talk about growing up: religion, politics, and money. Now, 2 of those things we can't stop talking about now, but we still have this weird stigma about talking about money management and, what is a 401k? What's a mutual fund? And what are these fees that people keep talking about? If we give people equal access to understanding these so that they can then make those decisions from an informed point of view, and hopefully have access to the tools that help fully flesh out their financial life and the financial ecosystem that we all live in, that the knowledge that they gain can actually be used as they move up the economic ladder in their lives. I mean, this slide I think is very telling. When people are financially literate as a measure of, getting more than half of those questions correct, or even all of those questions correct, we almost completely remove the racial differences in terms of financial fragility. I mean, this is a big deal. We should be talking about this all the time, but it has to start somewhere, building knowledge and in a classroom, in a safe environment to practice these things, where the stakes are low and you're just kind of going through plans and so forth is a great way to start. And, our friends at the council, Nan and her network, they do an excellent job of that. And we need to get those resources in front of every kid from every community.
Thank you, Billy. And you raised an important point about money is a scary topic for a lot of people. We've been doing family financial literacy nights across the country for the last couple of years, primarily focused in low and moderate income neighborhoods, because there are very often not just racial but cultural differences in how people approach money. So what's really struck me at all of these events is that every parent or caregiver that I talk to and say, what do you think? Was this good? And the kids have fun. They play games that are around personal finance. Volunteers come. There's pizza. It's always helpful. But the parents and caregivers, every last one of them said, I'm so glad that we did this because I didn't know how to talk to my child about money. And now we can just do it. And many of them also say, I'm so surprised that my kids actually want to talk about this and that they actually already know stuff and that they're curious. This is the best time, right? When your children still listen to you when they're little and they actually want to talk to you before they become teenagers. So having those conversations and anything that we can do to start those conversations is helpful. So these nights have actually become an important part of our advocacy efforts because from the bottom up, they start spreading the desire to bring more of this into school. The getting requirements passed, hard road. Top down, we actually need both in this country. We have to have requirements and set the standards and push people toward the greater good because it really makes a difference, as Billy and I have outlined. But there's also that bottom up approach of getting parents, teachers, and even the kids engaged in acquiring this knowledge.
All right, what questions do you have, participants? Oh, it looks like we already have one pop in here. That looks like a good Nan question to me. Do you see that, Nan? What are the best ways to educate teachers on financial literacy?
That does look like a Nan question. For some reason, I'm not seeing it, but that's okay. So we do a tremendous amount of professional development for teachers through virtually through webinars and also in person, and some truly online. There are 3 aspects of professional development that in this subject that we think are important. One is we actually have to teach them about the subject. Teachers look like anybody else in this country, and many of them don't actually have the knowledge themselves. Most math teachers probably studied math, probably majored in math in college, But if you're teaching personal finance, somebody could have just asked you to do it at the last minute because all of a sudden it's a requirement. So that happens, and it's always so painful when we hear those stories, because teachers want to be good at what they're doing. They want to teach their kids. They want to see the learning happening in their classroom. So we actually teach the subject matter to the teachers. That's the first element. The second piece is we talk to them about the pedagogy. Like, how do you actually teach this? So that's super important. And then we actually practice with them, and we give them lessons, and we work in small groups to teach them how to do it. So this is a participation sport. It's an apprenticeship sport teaching. So we need to show people how to do it. All of the lessons that we have are on their way to being activity-based, updated to modern pedagogy. It changes quite frequently, actually. So they're active, they're engaging, they're hands-on, and that's why the teachers bring them back into their classrooms. So they're developed for us. And the ones that we use from other organizations, they're all developed by educators, and that makes a difference because teachers understand what it takes to get a kid to learn. That's why random MBAs like me who don't know how to teach should be allowed in the classroom. We let our volunteers in because we have to sometimes, but we always have a teacher standing there to actually do the real teaching. It's a real subject, just like any other, and it requires that level of professionalism and dedication to really make it stick with the kids. So in addition to the live versions, either via webinar or in person, we do a conference every year so teachers can share ideas and best practices. That community of practice and of learning, I think, is really important in every subject. And we also have some information on ExcelinEd, our resource for teachers. We do have recordings of our webinars. It's more fun when you're in person because you can actually chat. The chats go wild on these things with people sharing information. And we also have some short videos, which are particularly good if you're learning different concepts for the first time. So I would encourage if any of you who are participating in this discussion today to go to ExcelinEd, to look for some of the resources that some of our colleagues in the field have. Next Gen, just search online and find the great resources that are out there. Ours and Next Gens, I know, are all developed by educators and are well used by people in our affiliated network, and they're a pretty picky bunch because they're all educators.
You know, speaking of that, something I've noticed over the years is that you know, the more confident a teacher is with a particular subject, even within personal finance, the more likely they are to cover it. And a trend we noticed several years ago is that teachers would often skip the insurance section because they didn't fully understand that themselves, you know. And it goes to show that we're all human in this space, and none of us wanted to really admit that. Oh gosh, I don't know a whole lot about my insurance, you know, my car insurance and my home insurance and managing risk and my umbrella policy and all these words that people throw around, but really kind of digging in and understanding that. And there was a direct increase in the number of teachers who integrated those topics into their personal finance or economic education courses after they themselves sat through some webinars or sat through some trainings or sat through some workshops. So it really is that build that confidence in the topic, because in general, Americans are not financially literate. We're very average. You know, there's a lot of international data available, and the U.S. sadly falls sort of in the middle of the pack, and yet we have some of the most complicated financial structures in the world, and to navigate when it comes to things like planning for retirement and being your own CFO and so forth. So it's okay to be a little intimidated by the topic, but it can be solved with quality professional development. And there's some really good opportunities for that out there. Other questions that you want to know? What do you want to know about policy? How, you know, how can organizations like ours support your work in the classroom?
I'm actually wondering how many people that are listening to us are teaching financial education or teaching personal finance in their classrooms. Oh, somebody's asked a question about states that have made financial education a priority. Thank you. I'll start there. I told the Virginia story, and I think that's been really important. They put a lot of effort to getting it passed. I will tell you about another state that doesn't have a requirement, but's been pretty successful in getting financial education out there, and that's Rhode Island. And the reason, and that's been a bottom-up story. Their state treasurer, actually their former one and their current one, are both really, really convinced that this is a path to opportunity. Now, you may have passed through Providence if you've been driving up I-95, but there are parts of of Rhode Island, the Blackstone River Valley, that were pretty hard hit in the late 90s and early aughts with just very low economic activity, right? This used to be a center of manufacturing, small manufacturing, and that's largely gone. So there's quite a bit of poverty in that state. So the treasurer took this on and said, this is important. Now, Rhode Island's a small state, so he was literally able to gather up all the principals and superintendents in his office almost. And he sponsored education days, institutes for educators from across the state to come together and have a day of learning and education. And they've been great. Our affiliate there has been a part of those. And it helped her to build a broader base to continue to educate teachers in Rhode Island. So for me, that's just another version of the success story. If you have the will and the connectivity and the right people involved, you can actually get a lot of really great personal financial education into the schools without a requirement, although the requirement's definitely a good incentive.
I'll tell a story on the other side of that. A state where there was a great opportunity that at the last minute was lost. And so this is a cautionary tale of how important it is to really think through the strategy and the policy of what effective financial education really means and is. And it's about my home state of Kentucky. And I was actually asked to testify before their state legislature on this topic because they had passed a requirement in 2018 that all students have to have financial education to graduate. And it was a very thoughtfully written state policy. And right at the last minute, they changed one word that said every student has to have a financial education program, not a financial education class. And so the way that schools and districts could check the box, if you will, was to just have someone come in and do an after-school program one time for a couple hours, and that counted. And what happens is you create the perception that it doesn't work because, hey, look, this state has a requirement, but the scores aren't going up. Financial literacy scores aren't increasing. Credit scores aren't increasing. Well, it's because what counts is a really super, super, super low bar. Maybe the bar is touching the grass, and that can actually create the opposite effect, and that you build people thinking, well, I had this course, I should be able to figure this out, and you create too much confidence with too little substance under it. And that's why policy really needs to be thoughtful in terms of personal finance. And we think the gold standard is, we at NEFI, and I don't want to speak for Nan, but is the semester requirement. That we see that as the gold standard. But there are still really good courses that do like a whole 6 weeks as a unit as part of a different course that you can really get a good intro to the topic. There are other ways to do it that are thoughtful, but just a standard, just a requirement alone has a lot of caveats to it, if you will, in terms of what would be considered success here. And so I would caution folks about that in terms of how do you put the language, how can it be interpreted? And we know that's the case with all, policy, especially in terms of education, but use those standards as a guide for what's the minimum, and then build from the minimum.
Yeah, I would agree. There's so much that goes into this. Also, if a requirement isn't funded, it's problematic because you talked earlier about the fact that teachers' time is so squeezed. And they really need an opportunity to have some professional development. They don't have time to go off and find it. And while there are many great free resources out there, sometimes you just need to buy some stuff, and that's helpful as well. So all of those things make make a difference. I'm going to one-up you on the gold standard, which is to say we would love to see a little bit of personal finance integrated throughout the curriculum from K through 12, ending with that capstone class. You also mentioned really good 6-week classes, like a unit. So we've been fortunate to do some work in New York State in the career and technical education curriculum. And these are typically students who aren't going to be going off to a 4-year degree. Very often these students are in low and moderate income schools, but they're getting good skills and capabilities to go out and get a job and earn a living and build a good life for themselves. So we were thrilled that New York State did put a program in place for financial literacy, and it's not every day, all day, or a full semester, but it is an important unit in the life skills part of the CTE curriculum. So I am hoping that as we are on this path of advocating for more and better financial education, CTE can be another important path, because it will reach a lot of the kids who are from low and moderate income schools and communities who might not get this in the regular classroom, but through these programs, they will get the tools that they really need to succeed, because these kids are headed for jobs really soon. So it's just another path to help to erase that wealth gap. We have a question. Are there any interactive tools or apps for personal finance that you recommend for adult learners who want to become their own CFOs? Love that, by the way. Thank you. So Billy, I see you put the Jumpstart Clearinghouse in there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Nan and I are actually on, I told you it's a small community. We are both on the board of directors of an organization called the Jumpstart Coalition for Personal Financial Literacy. And this organization is a just as it says, it's a coalition of national organizations, and in some places local organizations, who are working to champion and provide financial education to K-12 students and to some extent college students. And one of the great benefits of this organization is that we all come together, we get to know each other. It's not a competitive space like other industries are. We all want to support each other, and we all have our strengths, and we think good education means that teachers are going to use the best of what we all do. And so Jumpstart took that idea and built something called the Clearinghouse, where everything in this clearinghouse goes through a vetting process. And it's almost like e-commerce. You go in and you click, I need resources for high school students that are for a particular topic, that are a particular length, and then it shows you what's available. And then you can kind of sort through those and try those different tools and resources and see which ones are good for you. Are you looking for teacher resources? Are you looking for games? Gamification is a big thing in our space and has been for many years, where they play games to learn, financial concepts, and then you go back to the classroom and you apply those things. So that's where I would recommend to start. Go to the Jumpstart Clearinghouse, and then you'll see how many great resources there are. There's something like 50 full curricula in there, like a whole course, like for the whole semester, a whole year for a classroom that are in that, in addition to tons of activities and anything you can think of, the 45-minute activity or the one-off lesson, all the way up to the full 1-year class. You can see that all in that website.
Yeah, that's a great resource for specifically for educators to use in their classrooms. That's where EconEdLink comes in for us, and you just go there on econedlink.org and find the tools. For adults, a little bit out of my space, and it's harder, I think, to find places like the Clearinghouse or EconEdLink to find things for adults than it is for kids. I don't want to tout any private sector organizations in particular, but if you look at the big low-cost investor houses, and I'm thinking places like Schwab, Vanguard, and Fidelity, and because that is who they are, but disclaimer, they all fund us, but their websites are actually pretty good in terms of definitions and of learning about your own financial education. your own personal finance. If you're looking for definitions, you're going to crack up when I say this, but I sent somebody once to the irs.gov site, because if you really want to learn about retirement plans, they actually do a fantastic job of explaining all the different types of IRAs, which I always get confused about, and the rules change. And if you're at that point in your life where you're able to save for retirement, and I hope you started doing that when you were, the moment you got your first paycheck, then you could go there, and they really have some good things. The other place that is a good pointer for resources is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, and they're really good at periodically going out and pulling together different kinds of resources focused on different topics. So that's another, they've laid things out really well. And their heart is in the right place on so many things. So that would be another place to go. There is no nirvana on this, but those are a small set of places. And for adults, it's just a little harder.
I don't think any of you will be lonely for resources in the industry. There's a lot of good materials, and that's the beauty of educators, is that they test all the things available and make their own course out of what they like best or what suits their teaching style best. And we've seen that for decades now. That's that they take some of what Nan's organization provides, and then they'll take a couple of apps and a game, and then they'll bring in a guest speaker, and it just makes it for a thoughtful, engaging experience. But I do think you'll see that your students will really appreciate something that can be applied immediately. They can leave the classroom that day and apply something that they're learning, which kids are always saying, why do I need to learn this? Well, this is the topic that they're not going to say that about.
Right. Karis, I see a question from you. Billy, do you see this question in the chat? I'm having a little bit of trouble parsing it. By the way, I sometimes type and miss some things when I'm typing, so I'm just wondering, I'm not sure what the question is. School districts that teach financial literacy are more likely to make college trade school decisions than traditional.
I think I get what
okay, I'm missing that.
Basically, does financial education lead people toward more traditional teaching versus more of a more expensive, maybe profit-based certificate or program? I think the question is, does financial education help people go to sort of the state university or the private liberal arts college more than the for-profit route for training? I don't think we know that necessarily, but what we do know is that financial education helps. There's a direct correlation between quality financial education and paying for college and the ways that people apply what they're paying. So there's probably the implication of that. And if they're, if they've gone through a good fin ed class, they're probably less likely, this is speculation here, but they're probably less likely to go towards something that's marketed to them and maybe saying, is the community college certificate in welding a better value than the certificate program at the so-and-so, the Billy Hensley Institute in my local town? I would think so based on the other information we have about paying for college, but I couldn't probably guarantee that. That's a good question, thoughtful question. We also get asked a lot, does financial education help people graduate from college? We don't know the exact answer to that yet. That's the kind of thing that needs more data. But what we do know is that the number one reason people leave college is financial reasons. So sometimes that's just, maybe you lost a job or you're trying to work two jobs and go to school, and then that, that conflicts. But a study that we funded from Ohio State a few years ago looked at, if you actually borrow too much or too little, you're less likely to graduate than borrowing just enough to cover the need. And the rationale for that is if you borrow too much, you get overwhelmed by the time you're maybe third year and the balance is starting to scare you, or if you borrow too little, you're too financially stressed to be able to pay for what it costs to go, and so you maybe are working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to manage a full-time load, and so something has to give. And usually the first thing that you let go of it is the courses. So that data are very clear. It's like a bell-shaped curve where, it's like the Goldilocks of borrowing to go to college. And it's really about fulfilling the need and not just taking the maximum amount, or not being so afraid of the balance that you don't take any or too little. And then you end up not finishing it or taking years to go to school. And you lose that on the earning potential in the long term. We probably can do one more question, I think, with the time we have. Any other questions or wisdom from Nan Morrison, the great and mighty?
No, I was just say the college question is so complicated, but as I visited some of the state challenges for our personal finance and econ challenges, I know that a lot of the students that participate in those are first to college kids. And when I talk to them about where they're going, the answer is always where they're going to give me the most money. So these are kids who clearly have wind at their back in terms of thinking about, I'm going to work hard and get a college education, whatever it takes. But for them, having been through these programs, I think they're thinking about this in a smart way. All else being equal, where can I get more money? Because that's going to make a difference. And if I have to travel an hour further and be further from home, if I can get the money, that's important. So I will be interested, Billy, to seeing some more research on the completion rates. But from what I've read, a lot of the researchers who are looking at these areas specifically have a hypothesis that that's true, and they also have a pretty strong belief that they can prove that. So that would be really good to see over time if that plays out. It would not surprise me if it does.
Let me leave you with some parting data that'll scare you.
Of course.
I want to scare you into doing, scared straight, scared to FinEd. How about that? 43% of Americans cannot come up with $400 with an immediate crisis. We want to reiterate that. It is, this is national represented data, that if you had a $400 emergency, like a flat tire or what have you, whatever that would be, and you had to come up with the money right in that moment, that almost half of this country of 330 million people could not come up with that. And about a little over a third of Americans, like 36%, couldn't come up with $2,000 in 30 days. And that's not just, do you have $2,000 in your checking account? That could be put it on a credit card. That could be sell a couple of TVs. That could be, kind of rustle up some earnings really quickly, borrow from family or friends. Almost 40% of us could not come up with the $2,000 for a moderately priced crisis, like the deductible on a car accident, or your hot water heater explodes. How many, everybody's gone through something like that. The hail damages the roof, the hot water heater leaks, the dishwasher makes a mess while you're gone. All of those things happen. And our data at NEFI, we've done this survey several times now, that 69% of Americans will have an unexpected expense in any year. And hey, this year, everybody has unexpected things happening. So it's tough out there. So why not help people launch from high school or elementary school, middle school, with financial literacy as a tool for them? That's our takeaway for you. So thank you. It's been a great day. Nan, any closing wisdom?
That was perfect, Billy. Go back to your schools and say, we need to get this in here. Please help. And then call Bill and Ryan, and we'll get you there.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate you and all the work you do in the classrooms. And check out our websites.